our final topic of the day. Ahsoka, the new series from Star Wars, debuted just a couple days ago from when we're recording. They had a two-part debut. Okay, so the first episode was 54 minutes. The second episode was 42 minutes. I loved it.
Mm.
I mean, I will say right now, as I've said before, I am very biased. Star Wars fan, Ahsoka, the character fan, Rosario Dawson fan. So this was, this hit on all cylinders for me. I really liked it a lot. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on the first two episodes. And I asked you before you did watch it, but I've heard quite a few people, a couple people say that, hey, it was a little bit long,
Mm.
a little bit tough to get through. I actually had to split up watching the two episodes because they were feeling tired after the first one. But you have watched both episodes. I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one for me because this is new Star Wars, right? This is Dave Filoni. It's his show. He directed the first episode, but this is kind of, I guess, a continuation of Rebels, right? It's his
Mhm.
characters going forward, and I am not super familiar with these characters. Like, Thrawn, I know very well, but I know him in the context of Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie. But this is Dave Filoni's version, and I don't have really any of that kind of nostalgia or like interest from these characters because I've watched a little bit of Clone Wars and even less of Rebels. I've only seen like maybe 2 or 3 episodes of Rebels in total. Um, but despite that, I thought the show was great. Or shouldn't say great. I thought it was good. I thought the first episode wasn't as good as the second one. That episode was directed by Dave Filoni, and I do think that maybe he's a better writer than he is a director. And that's probably just because he's not had much experience to directing live action. He has done some stuff in The Mandalorian and I think Boba Fett. Maybe it was Boba Fett that he did, but like very little experience directing live action. And I do think some of the fights in the first episode were kind of clunky and didn't look cool. But the second episode, who was directed by someone else, I can't remember their name, I thought was much better. Like there was you know what? I won't get into spoilers. But there was a fight there in that episode that I loved. I thought it was great and looked much better than the fights in the first episode. And that second episode really, by the time it ended, I was like, yeah, I'm on board for this. I think this is great. This is a lot of fun. And even though I don't have much care, I don't care about these characters as much as I care about Luke. Even then, I'm not like the biggest Luke fan. I'm definitely a prequels fan more than the original trilogy, even though I love the original trilogy. A New Hope is my favorite Star Wars movie of all. But yeah, these characters aren't like my characters. But there was something I was noticing while watching this of like, I could imagine if you grew up with Rebels and Clone Wars, and if these characters were like the coolest characters to you, and seeing like, oh, maybe Ezra's still out there somewhere, and seeing all these characters introduced as their older selves, I could imagine, and even the locations, like you could tell, they're like Dave Filoni's like, yeah, we want you to feel some kind of nostalgia for these locations and like the ship and stuff like that you kind of got in, for some people like myself, Force Awakens, when they finally get on the Millennium Falcon and stuff like that. Like
Mhm.
you can tell that there's moments in this show that don't hit for me, but I imagine for people who are into that are like, it's like the best feeling ever. And I don't know, there's just something about this show that, especially, maybe this is just coming off of Secret Invasion and just how disappointing that was from top to bottom. There's something about this show that feels like this is made for a particular audience, and I'm glad that that's the case because it just looks like whoever's making this is having a lot of fun. And then on top of that, the look of the show looks like Star Wars. I think this is something that Star Wars has struggled with a bit since The Force Awakens, of Star Wars not looking and feeling like Star Wars, even though there has been a lot of stuff that I've liked. From the very first scene of when they're on the ship, I'm like, oh, this is a Star Wars set. And even the opening crawl, they had an opening crawl, something that we don't see a lot
Yes.
of.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all I can say is Dave Filoni being at the helm of this gives me hope. I I want to wait until the show is done to watch it all um at once. I'm still debating on whether or not I'm going to do that, but there's also the added thing of I loved Andor from the beginning, but then afterwards it kind of fell off for me. Secret Invasion was not great. All the other Marvel shows to me kind of fell off towards the end. I am a little worried that maybe this show won't stick the landing, but um I gotta say, Rosario Dawson's doing an awesome job as Ahsoka. She's really cool. She's very stoic, which is really cool to see. We haven't seen a lot of stoic Jedi in a long time. Um, and yeah, the acting is good. The show looks good. I have hope that it'll actually be good. But okay, that's from someone who doesn't have experience with a lot of Rebels and Clone Wars. You do have a lot of experience with those shows. Was like these cameos, or I shouldn't say cameos, but introducing these characters back to you and these locations as special as they might have seemed to someone who wasn't familiar with that, or did they fall flat? How did you feel about
No, it was great. Like,
them?
even from the first trailer for Ahsoka, I know when okay, Rosario Dawson came into Mandalorian, and then it was announced she was gonna have her own series, or Ahsoka was gonna have her own series. I mean, obviously, if I thought about it, I could have thought, okay, hey, the time that this takes place, she was with the rebels. This is afterwards. So, hey, maybe there's going to be some characters that show up afterwards. But I never thought that far ahead. I
Hmm.
was just like, cool, looking forward to seeing this. And then when the trailer came out and you see some of the familiar characters, like you see Harrison Dooler, you see Sabine, you see the Loth Cats, and you see Chopper, and you see the ship. Like, there's so many nostalgic moments in this. In the trailer for one, that I was like, I completely forgot that they were around the same time, but I'm definitely excited to see that come to life. And then seeing them in person, as you said, they're a little bit older. Everyone's a little more grown up than they were at the end of Rebels. And it's cool to see those people in live action.
Hmm.
And some of the sets and some of the places that you mentioned, to see that in live action, and then even some of the music.
Hmm.
Like, there's theme songs from Rebels that's woven into this, and I'm sure it's in the end credits also, so I'm sure it's going to be part of the whole series. But it's there's moments in Rebels where it's like there's big moments happening and the Rebels theme is playing, and you just have that feeling. And then in this episode, that music is playing too. It's like, oh man, this is hitting all the chords for me right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really liked the first two episodes, and the second episode was directed by Steph Green.
Mm.
Steph Green. Yeah, I thought they both were great. And I also like the fact that it's interesting because okay, this is sort of the past of or I don't know, it's weird, right? Because there's obviously the Ray stuff in the Force Awakens that happens after all of this.
Yeah.
And this is almost in the middle of the Star Wars story. But when you look at shows, like Andor, like The Mandalorian, like this show Ahsoka, this is like the present of Star Wars. If you look
Yeah.
at the bulk of the stuff that's coming out right now, we're in the present of Star Wars. But it's interesting to see that they're still expanding that and they're telling new stories, because you'd think, all right, we already know how all this ends. So really, what more stories are there to tell? And we already know how it began, right? When you talk about the prequels,
Hmm.
but they're still finding ways to expand the stories, to tell things and give us new, ideas of this galaxy that we haven't heard before, which I really like and I find really interesting. And it's definitely because Dave Filoni is the one who spent so much time in this universe, developing this universe, the Rebels universe, especially with George Lucas.
Yeah.
So he has so much that he can do with this, and I'm sure there's so much that he's going to do with this, right? And yeah, I mean, I really am trying not to spoil anything. Maybe we'll just stop recording and then we'll talk about that
Yeah.
afterwards. But I like where the series is going. And I remember you saying that, okay, after during Andor, I kind of the heist happened and it built up and then it kind of, fell off for you. I I didn't feel that way. I
Mhm.
liked the whole way through. Yes, definitely the heist was like a huge moment in it. But Ahsoka is only 8 episodes. So
Yeah.
there's only 7 more episodes. So maybe they've timed it perfectly. It's gonna get to the hype and it's gonna finish on a high note. And so maybe you should watch it week to week. Just, just ride the hype train with everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it was great. And even like there's, just not really a spoiler, but there's a bit of a tie-in to the Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order, and could talk more about that off pod. But yeah, it's like this is the present time for Star Wars right now, and I really like what they're doing with it, and I really like the stories that they're telling with it, and I like how they're connecting everything together. And I'm really excited for the rest of this season. Wednesdays can or yeah, it came out Tuesday technically,
Yeah.
right?
It's Tuesday
So I think
nights.
the next one, yeah, Tuesday nights cannot come quick enough.
Yeah, and to your point, I think the reason why I have a little bit more hope, or I shouldn't say hope, I'm a little bit more positive on how this show will turn out compared to Andor is me personally. The reason why I New Hope is my favorite Star Wars movie is because it's fun. And I love fun Star Wars. To me, Andor was really fun up until the heist. And then after the heist, it got weird. It got like, and I know people love it. I don't think this is a problem. It's just for me, I like fun Star Wars, and to me, Dave Filoni makes fun Star Wars. Like that's just what he is. Like he's following in the footsteps of George Lucas. George Lucas always knew that he was making a kids series, a kids show, a kids movie, and he always wanted it to be fun for that reason. I don't think Andor or even what was the movie that Andor leads into? Rogue One.
Rogue One.
I don't think either of those were particularly all that fun. Although they
No.
had really cool stuff, I still think that scene with Darth Vader in Rogue One is one of the coolest things of all time. And also, the Imperial assault on Saw Gerrera, one of the coolest action sequences. But I think those first two episodes were just fun. There was a lot of back and forth between these characters. These characters were having fun in their universe, like Sabine. Um, you know, it wasn't taken too seriously. It's like this is Star Wars, and I think that's why I have a little bit more hope, or I'm a little bit more positive on it. But one thing I will say is the smallest bit of criticism. I'm kind of curious to see if you have any criticism. Is I would like for someone to take some pointers from George Lucas on how to direct a Star Wars fight, a lightsaber battle, because I don't know how, but ever since episode 1, 2, and 3, I don't think we've had lightsaber fights to that level in live action.
Hmm.
I don't think the sequels series did it. I don't think any of those fights were particularly on that level. I know a lot of people talk about the fight in the throne room, in Snoke's throne room, with Rey and Kylo Ren. I didn't think that was on the level of what we saw with like Anakin and Obi-Wan. And maybe this is just a Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor thing. Maybe they're just really good with lightsabers. But yeah, I would love to see a kind of a prequel style fight. I don't know. Am I wrong in that? Do you think that maybe their fights are a little bit more realistic than what the prequels were, and probably better in that way, or would you like to see some more prequel style fights too?
I would love to see prequel style fights. I don't think we're gonna get them.
Mm,
And yes, the throne room fight was great. Definitely not to the level of friggin' Darth Maul and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon.
yeah,
Definitely not to that level. And I've I've heard an explanation for it, and I don't know if this is coming from George Lucas, or maybe this is just a fan explanation later on that has popped up, and now people just take it as a truth. But it makes sense to me if you look at when the prequels took place in terms of, okay, there was a Jedi Order, they
mm,
were training from younglings, they were going on missions, there was a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of experience. And in terms of sword fighting and lightsaber fighting, and then you look at everything since then. Like the Jedi Order has fallen. There isn't proper training that's going on.
Yeah.
They don't have, hundreds of masters and thousands of students practicing every day. So it makes sense that their fights wouldn't be as clean and stylized. It would make sense that it would be more, brute force style and not as flashy as the prequels. That
Yeah.
makes sense. But I would still love to see them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think we're going to. Yeah, I don't think we're going to. But that's the explanation that I've heard. And once again, I don't know where that's come from. I don't know if it's come from George Lucas or Dave Filoni or someone else, but that's what I've heard. And um, so yeah, I'm not expecting amazing fights. There were some pretty good fights in this,
Yes, I agree.
or there's some decent fights in this. And there are definitely rumors that Christensen will be making an appearance,
Ooh, that would be awesome.
right? Like even when we look at the Obi-Wan series, how him and Ewan McGregor had a kind of an I mean, it was a flashback. They were definitely old.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was definitely something that was filmed recently. So, I mean, in the Rebels series, and spoiler alert, but if you haven't watched it yet, like, what are you doing? Just go and watch it right now. Even if you don't want to watch the whole thing, Disney Plus has a playlist of Ahsoka Tano essentials to watch. So there was a flashback Anakin Obi-Wan fight. During that flashback, I'm sure at some point there's either going to be a flashback to, Anakin and Ahsoka fighting, or maybe even Darth Vader and Ahsoka fighting, because that does happen
Yeah.
in Rebels,
Yeah.
right? So there is definitely a potential for a very cool fight scene. Who knows when? At some point over the next 6 episodes. Yeah, over the next 6 episodes, I'm sure that there will be a Darth Vader sight-in, maybe even just a voice.
Hmm.
But yeah, it would be cool if there was a a fight scene between the two of them. Um,
Do we see Luke in the show?
that's a good question. That's a very good question. Do we see Luke? Do we see Mando?
Yeah.
Do we
Do we
see
see
Grogu?
Mandalore at all?
I don't know. I and that's the thing too. That's the thing about this time in Star Wars is if you look at all the characters, right? They could bring back Luke. They could bring back the Mandalorian. They could bring back Grogu. They could bring back Bo-Katan,
Hmm.
right? Pretty much anyone that's in a current show, they could have pop up in this.
I mean, could could we ever see, maybe not in this show, but the Avengers of Dave Filoni characters showing up, against Thrawn or something like that? We get Bo-Katan and maybe, some of her Mandalorian followers. We get Jin, we get Luke. Well, Luke isn't really his character, but and all of the characters from this Ahsoka show. Do you think we'll ever get to see all of these guys on screen at the same time? Or is that way too much to ask for? Or even Han?
I think we do see them all at some point, but I swear I heard this somewhere or read this somewhere. There's gonna be a movie that comes out
Mm,
where it's like a big galactic event, and maybe that has to do with Thrawn, maybe that has to do with something leading up to the Death Star. But there's gonna be some big event that happens in a movie that is gonna bring all these stories that are kind of happening around at the same time. It's gonna bring them all together in one and sort of like tie the storylines together. So I think for that, we will see all of them together on the screen at once. And I'm sure at some point during the Ahsoka series, someone else is gonna pop up. If I had to bet on it, I would say it's Din and Grogu, just because like freaking cash cows, like
yeah, yeah.
throw Grogu in everything possible. Um, but I think yeah, at some point there's gonna be a crossover with another character, and then at some point there's gonna be a big feature film, a big galactic event that happens that brings all these stories together. So yeah,
Yeah. I
those are my thoughts.
I I I hope so too. It's just one of those things where I don't know if you can necessarily bring back the legacy characters, Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie.
Hmm.
Um, because obviously you're gonna have to recast most of them. Yes, you're having the deep faked version of
Of Luke.
yeah, of Luke previously, so maybe you can continue with that. But maybe it's just those characters are they're old Star Wars. This is new Star Wars. There's a George Lucas's characters. These are Dave Filoni's characters. I would like to see them. And originally, when I was watching the show, I was a little disappointed. Not disappointed. There, part of me really wanted to see a live action version of, Thrawn trying to hunt down Luke. But really, he's not even in the story anymore. It's not about Luke anymore. And I think that's interesting considering, Luke is the most powerful Jedi in the universe at this point. But I also think that that's okay. You can move on, you can tell new stories. Um and who knows, maybe we will see Luke someday, but even if we don't, I don't think that's the biggest downside, cuz clearly they're doing a good job with the characters that they have.